Roman soldiers were once paid in salt, a substance so vital it shaped the very word for wages. This is the hidden story of ancient economies built on salt and stars, a world where empires rose and fell based on their command of the earth beneath them and the sky above. You will discover how these two fundamental forces, one mundane and the other mystical, created the trade routes and wealth that built our civilization. How did a desert city made of salt blocks become a center of unimaginable riches? What secret knowledge allowed sailors to cross an entire ocean using only the stars as their map? By the end, you will see history not as a list of dates, but as a grand narrative of human ingenuity driven by necessity. What invisible threads from our ancient past do you think still guide our world today? That soldier accepting his ration of salt was participating in a system far grander than he likely realized. This crystalline substance was the white gold of the ancient world, a form of wealth you could literally taste. Its value was rooted in profound, practical necessity. Before refrigeration, salt was the only widely available method to preserve food. It cured meats, pickled vegetables, and saved entire populations from starvation during long winters or on arduous journeys. But its role went even deeper than the pantry. The human body requires salt to conduct nerve signals, contract muscles, and maintain its delicate fluid balance. A lack of it meant weakness, illness, and eventually a failure to thrive. This biological imperative made salt non-negotiable. Its scarcity in many inland regions, contrasted with its absolute necessity, is what inflated its value to incredible heights. It became a currency you could not simply print more of, a commodity whose worth was understood from the markets of China, where state monopolies on salt funded dynasties, to the temples of Rome, where it was used in sacred rites for purification. Control a salt source and you controlled life itself. The vast underground mines of Hallstatt in Austria, operational for thousands of years, funded a rich Celtic culture whose artifacts still astonish archaeologists. In the searing heat of the Sahara, caravans of thousands of camels carried precious salt slabs from remote pans to trade for gold, weight for weight, in legendary cities like Timbuktu. This tangible, earthly wealth, scraped from the earth or evaporated from the sea, formed one half of a remarkable economic equation. It was a system grounded in the soil, yet its other half reached for the heavens themselves. That Phoenician captain, his eyes fixed on the constellations, was consulting the first global positioning system. For him, the sky was not a distant mystery but a practical tool, a celestial roadmap drawn in points of light. Ursa Major, the Great Bear, was his North Star, a fixed point of orientation in a sea of utter darkness. This knowledge transformed the open ocean from an impassable barrier into a highway. But this celestial cartography required more than just recognizing shapes. It demanded a deep, generational understanding of seasonal shifts. The precise timing of a constellation's rising or setting could signal the arrival of vital monsoon winds or the perfect window for a harvest. In Babylon, priest astronomers meticulously recorded these celestial patterns on clay tablets, their observations directly funding the state through more efficient agriculture and trade. In Alexandria, scholars like Ptolemy synthesized this data into star catalogues, creating a shared language of the heavens that empowered merchants. And across the vast Pacific, Polynesian voyagers memorized the paths of hundreds of stars, using them to navigate a water hemisphere and establish trade networks that spanned thousands of miles. This intellectual capital, this guarded knowledge of the stars, was as valuable as any physical treasure. It enabled the first truly globalized economies, guiding ships laden with goods across trackless waters. The stars showed the way, but the motivation for such perilous journeys was often found in the cargo hold itself, a substance that crystallized from the earth and sea. These caravan routes were the economic superhighways of their age, etched not in asphalt but in sand and stone. A single camel could carry a slab of salt weighing as much as a person, a crystalline currency mined from the heart of the desert. Its destination was the legendary city of Timbuktu, a place where this white gold was traded, weight for weight, with the yellow gold of West African empires. The wealth generated funded the great libraries and universities of Mali, turning a desert outpost into a cosmopolitan center of learning. In the other direction, Roman engineers paved the Via Salaria, the salt road, to ensure a steady flow of this essential mineral from the coastal pans to the legions and citizens of the interior. These roads were more than just paths for commerce. They were conduits for culture, carrying new ideas in philosophy, revolutionary technologies in metalworking, and entire systems of faith. A merchant traveling these routes would hear a dozen languages and see goods from forests and mountains he could never visit himself. But how did such fragile networks of exchange survive the vast, unmapped distances and the very real dangers of the journey? Their safe passage was negotiated not with earthly powers alone, but with a celestial one. The same stars that guided ships across the water also guided these caravans across the trackless desert. Navigators used the position of constellations to hold their course through the featureless dunes, their path illuminated by a silent, constant partner in the sky above. This partnership between the Earth's treasure and the heavens' map created a stable, predictable system, a global economy operating on a rhythm of salt and stars. While Roman roads were etched into the continent, another kind of pathway was being traced across the world's greatest ocean. The Polynesian expansion stands as one of humanity's most breathtaking achievements, a story written not on land but on the open sea. These master navigators undertook voyages of staggering distance, sailing for weeks across thousands of miles of trackless blue. Their vessels were not simple rafts but massive double-hulled canoes, engineered for stability and storage. Each one was a self-contained world, carrying entire families, precious seedlings of taro and breadfruit, and even domesticated animals, all setting sail toward a horizon that promised either a new home or oblivion. Their survival depended on a form of knowledge so refined it became an economic force in itself. They read the ocean as if it were a text, interpreting the subtle patterns of swells rebounding from distant islands, watching the flight paths of seabirds at dusk that always led back to land. But their primary map was the night sky. They memorized a mental star compass, a celestial chart that identified the precise rising and setting points of hundreds of stars. A navigator would know that holding a course directly beneath the star known as Hokupa, our North Star, meant sailing north while the Southern Cross pointed the way south. This was not random exploration, it was deliberate, repeatable travel. A star just above the horizon at a specific hour meant an island lay a 5-day sail in that direction. This celestial literacy was their most valuable asset, the engine of their entire economy. It enabled the systematic colonization of islands from Hawaii to New Zealand to Rapa Nui, creating a web of settlements across an area larger than any continent. This network then fueled a thriving maritime economy. Canoes would travel established star paths to trade volcanic basalt for fine adzes, precious red feathers for ceremonial regalia, and marriage partners to strengthen alliances. Their wealth was not hoarded in underground mines but was measured in knowledge, mobility, and the ability to sustainably connect a world of scattered islands. They built an empire of the sea funded entirely by their command of the stars. How does such a vast, decentralized civilization, bound only by shared knowledge, eventually face the pressures of a changing world? This power to halt time transformed entire coastlines and fueled empires. Think of a Roman fish sauce factory, where the air was thick with the pungent scent of fermenting mackerel and anchovies. This was garum, a condiment so essential to the Roman palate that its production became a major industry. Vats were filled with layers of small fish, herbs, and an overwhelming quantity of salt. The salt did more than just flavor the sauce. It actively prevented spoilage, allowing the fish to break down safely through enzymatic action over months. This process created a stable, valuable product that could be bottled, shipped across the Mediterranean, and sold from Britain to Syria. The entire operation, from the fishing boats to the salt suppliers to the ceramic jar makers, formed a complex economic web entirely spun from the need for preservation. Far to the north, a similar story unfolded with the Atlantic cod. Basque and later English fishermen would venture into the rich, cold waters off Newfoundland, catching cod in unimaginable numbers. But a fish rotting on a ship halfway to Europe was worthless. The solution was salt. Aboard the vessels or in shore-based stations called flakes, the cod were split and heavily salted, drawing out the moisture and creating a rock-hard dried fish that could survive a journey of any length. This durable, protein-rich commodity became a staple food across Europe, particularly on Catholic holy days when meat was forbidden. It was a form of edible money. The taxes and tariffs on this salted cod funded navies and enriched port cities, proving that the true value of a fish was not just in its capture, but in its ability to last. This alchemy of preservation, turning fleeting abundance into lasting wealth, required one thing above all: a constant and massive supply of salt. And that demand created a pressure that would push human ingenuity to its absolute limits, leading to engineering marvels that still dot the landscape today. The wealth of nations grew not in treasuries but in the fields, a bounty timed by the stars. For the farmer in ancient Egypt, the most important economic indicator was not a market price, but the first glimpse of the star Sirius glowing just before the dawn. This heliacal rising was a celestial alarm clock, announcing that the Nile's life-giving floods were only days away. The entire Egyptian economy, a powerhouse of the ancient world, was synchronized to this event. The floodwaters would recede, leaving behind a fresh layer of fertile black silt, and the race to plant emmer wheat and flax would begin. A successful harvest meant a kingdom could eat, export grain to its neighbors, and collect the grain taxes that paid for everything from the army to the pyramids. This was an economy literally rooted in the soil, yet its schedule was written in the sky. Far across the world, Mayan astronomer priests climbed the steps of their towering temples to observe the precise movements of Venus and the sun. Their calculations were not abstract science, they were the operating system for their civilization. The complex Mayan calendar, a marvel of interlocking cycles, told farmers exactly when to burn their fields, when to plant maize, and when to expect the rain. This precision created the agricultural surplus that supported populous cities, a class of artisans, and a vibrant trade network stretching across Mesoamerica. The corn itself was a form of currency, and its reliable abundance, guaranteed by celestial observation, was the bedrock of Mayan wealth and power. In both desert and jungle, the sky provided the ultimate schedule, transforming the uncertainty of nature into a predictable engine of prosperity. This cosmic partnership between earth and heavens created stability, but what happens when that stability is challenged, when the very knowledge that guides a civilization becomes a target? A salt bar in Ethiopia was more than just a seasoning, it was a $10 bill. Known as amol, these hardened blocks, often scored with grooves for easy breaking, served as the primary currency for everyday purchases across the region for centuries. A farmer might buy a basket of grain with a few small pieces, while a merchant would use entire bars to acquire livestock. This system worked because salt perfectly embodied the core principles of money. It was durable enough to survive long journeys across the desert, portable in manageable slabs, and easily divisible into smaller, standardized units. Most importantly, its value was intrinsic and universally understood. Everyone needed it, everyone used it, and its production required immense effort, making it a trusted representation of labor and worth. Far to the east, in the high plains of Tibet, a similar system flourished. Salt harvested from the briny northern lakes was pressed into heavy bricks, each one stamped with an official seal that guaranteed its purity and weight. These bricks were then carried by yak caravans on treacherous mountain paths to the tea-producing regions of China. There they were traded, brick for brick, for compressed cakes of tea, fueling one of history's great cross-border exchanges. This tangible, earthly money, something you could hold in your hand and taste on your tongue, formed one pole of the ancient economic world. Its value was immediate and physical. But the other pole of value was entirely abstract, written in light across the night sky. Celestial knowledge, the intricate understanding of star paths and planetary cycles, held a different kind of wealth. It was not carried in a merchant's pouch but in a navigator's memory. It could not be divided or spent, yet it guided ships laden with tangible goods across oceans. This knowledge was the ultimate intangible asset, a form of capital that empowered entire civilizations to leverage the physical world. How did these two forms of value, the salt you could hold and the stars you could only follow, eventually converge to create the complex financial systems we know today? High above the bustling city, a Mesopotamian priest stood on his ziggurat, his eyes tracing the slow dance of planets. He was not merely a religious figure, he was the state's chief economist. The clay tablet in his hands did not record prayers but data. Every eclipse, every comet's path, every shift in the planet Venus was meticulously noted, believed to be a direct message from the gods about the kingdom's immediate future. A particular alignment might warn of a poor barley harvest, prompting the temple to release grain reserves from its vast storehouses. Another celestial pattern could be interpreted as favoring a military campaign, leading the king to mobilize the army. This was not mere superstition, it was a system of risk management. By claiming to read the divine will in the stars, these priests gained unparalleled authority. They advised on the very foundations of the economy, when to plant, when to tax, and when to engage in trade. The ziggurat was therefore far more than a staircase to heaven. It functioned as a central bank and a planning ministry, its policies dictated by the celestial movements its priests alone could interpret. This sacred knowledge created a powerful feedback loop. A successful prediction, whether by divine insight or acute observation of seasonal patterns linked to the stars, reinforced their authority, granting them greater control over the kingdom's resources. They were the ultimate gatekeepers of prosperity, their economic influence carved not in stone but written in the night sky. How does such a system, built on specialized and secret knowledge, eventually adapt or crumble when confronted with new ideas? That priest on the ziggurat understood that controlling a necessity meant controlling the people. This principle reached its most potent expression not with celestial knowledge, but with the white crystals scraped from the earth. Where salt flowed, power was never far behind. The immense value of this everyday essential made it an irresistible target for rulers, leading to some of history's most sophisticated and deeply resented systems of control. In ancient China, as early as the 7th century, emperors perfected the art of the state monopoly. The government declared that all salt, from the vast coastal evaporation ponds to the deep inland brine wells, belonged to the throne. Private production was forbidden. The state then sold this salt to licensed merchants at a high price, who in turn sold it to the public, with the profit flowing directly into the imperial treasury. This steady, predictable river of revenue was the financial engine that built the Great Wall, funded colossal armies, and maintained a sprawling bureaucracy that governed millions. It was a tax hidden in plain sight, a levy on life itself that every family had to pay simply to preserve their food and sustain their health. A similar story unfolded half a world away in France under a system known as the Gabelle. This salt tax was so notoriously complex and unfair that it became a symbol of royal oppression. The law required every citizen over the age of 8 to purchase a fixed amount of state salt each year, often at an inflated price. Even more infuriating was its uneven application. Some provinces were exempt, while others were forced to pay exorbitant rates, creating a patchwork of resentment across the country. Salt smugglers, known as faux sauniers, became folk heroes for evading the royal tax collectors, and the brutal punishments they faced only fueled public outrage. This direct state intervention in the most basic of markets demonstrated a cold political calculus. By controlling the supply and price of an inescapable commodity, a government could generate immense wealth without the political risk of directly taxing land or income. It was a way to build and maintain political power on a grand scale, using a terrestrial resource to fund empires and, in the case of France, ultimately helping to spark a revolution that would reshape the world. If a government could so effectively monopolize the wealth of the earth, what stopped it from attempting to control the knowledge of the heavens themselves? The sweat of a slain giant became the sea in Norse tales, a primal substance born from the body of a god. This was not just a story of creation, but a sacred explanation for the very salt that preserved the Vikings' winter stockfish and gave their cattle vital minerals. Across the world, the ancient Greeks believed the ocean's saltiness came from the endless, sorrowful tears of the sea goddess Amphitrite. Why would a culture imagine the sea itself as born from divine grief? Perhaps because they understood on a fundamental level that this briny water was the source of their wealth, the highway for their trade, and the origin of the salt that cured their food. These myths elevated a practical, economic necessity into a cosmic principle, weaving it into the fabric of their understanding of the world. In Japan, the sun goddess Amaterasu was not merely a celestial being. She was the source of light that made rice cultivation possible. Her withdrawal into a cave, a central myth, plunged the world into darkness and famine, a direct correlation between celestial order and earthly survival. Her light was the original capital, the energy input that drove the entire agricultural economy. These stories served a profound purpose beyond entertainment. They were the spiritual operating systems for early civilizations, sanctifying the resources that underpinned their very existence. To honor the gods was to ensure the sun would rise and the sea would yield its salt. This divine framework made the labor of the salt farmer and the observations of the star priest not just jobs but sacred duties. The economy was a covenant with the cosmos, a ritualized exchange where human effort was offered in return for the continued blessing of salt and stars. When the foundations of this celestial partnership began to shift, what new understanding of the world would have to take its place? The Sahara holds cities made of the very substance they were built to extract. Taghaza was a settlement constructed entirely from salt blocks, its houses and even its mosque carved from the raw material of its economy. This was not a city founded on the promise of water or fertile land, but on the crystalline deposits just beneath the desert surface. Life here was a testament to human endurance in the face of extreme hardship. Water and all other supplies had to be hauled across vast, empty distances, making survival a costly and constant struggle. Yet this harsh environment was an economic powerhouse. Miners worked the salt pans, cutting the mineral into heavy, standardized slabs that would become the currency of empires. The real magic, however, happened not in the mining but in the movement. These salt slabs began an incredible journey south, carried by caravans of camels that could number in the thousands. Each camel bore a load that was its own weight in salt, a slow-moving river of white gold flowing across the dunes. This was a logistical miracle, requiring not just camels but a deep, generational knowledge of desert survival. Guides had to navigate featureless seas of sand, find hidden wells, and protect the caravan from the relentless sun. Their safe passage was a negotiated partnership with the desert itself, a feat of organization as sophisticated as any modern corporation. The destination for this precious cargo was the legendary cities of the Sahel like Timbuktu and Gao. There, the salt was traded, often weight for weight, for the gold mined in the forests of West Africa. The wealth generated from this direct exchange of Earth's treasures did not just fill coffers. It built universities and libraries, attracting scholars in astronomy, medicine, and law. It funded art and architecture that still inspire awe today. A city born from salt in the barren heart of the desert was paradoxically the catalyst for glorious centers of learning and culture hundreds of miles away. How does a civilization built on such a fragile, physical exchange ultimately preserve its most valuable asset, its knowledge, for the future? The myth of the Argonauts was never just a story. It was a coded economic blueprint. Jason's quest for the Golden Fleece, a symbol of stolen royal legitimacy, perfectly mirrors the real-life expeditions that Greek captains undertook into the treacherous waters of the Black Sea. Their goal was not a mythical pelt but tangible wealth, access to the rich amber deposits of the north, the vital tin required for bronze, and the exotic spices that commanded fortunes back home. These voyages were the high-risk venture capital of the ancient world, where a single successful journey could fund a city for a year. Guiding this economic ambition required more than just courage. It demanded a kind of intelligence that seemed almost supernatural to the ancient mind. This is where the myth gives us a profound metaphor. The Argo, their ship, was said to be gifted with speech by the goddess Hera. Its figurehead, carved from sacred oak, could offer prophetic advice, warning of hidden rocks and predicting the weather. This talking ship is a beautiful allegory for the collective navigational genius of the crew. It represents the accumulated knowledge of star paths, the ability to read subtle shifts in the wind and wave patterns, and the oral traditions passed down from one sailor to the next. This was not magic, it was data. The ship itself became a thinking entity, its intelligence a fusion of human observation and celestial guidance. The Argonauts, like all ancient mariners, steered by the constellations, using the bear and the lyre to hold their course through the unknown. The entire epic encapsulates that fundamental partnership, a fusion of celestial guidance and raw economic desire that sent ships beyond the horizon, turning the sea from a barrier into a bridge for the very first global markets. A handshake was never just a handshake in the ancient world. It was often sealed with salt. This humble mineral was the original social contract, a tangible symbol of trust and good faith exchanged between people. To share bread and salt with a guest was to enter into a sacred covenant, a promise of protection and peace that was understood across countless cultures. Breaking this bond was considered a profound transgression, an offense against the very foundations of social order. This ritual transformed a stranger from a potential threat into a trusted partner. For a traveling merchant, this symbolic act was as crucial as his scales. Arriving in a distant land, he would be offered salt as a gesture of welcome, instantly lowering the invisible barriers of suspicion. This established a foundation of trust that made complex negotiations possible. A deal sealed with salt was considered binding, its integrity as unquestionable as the mineral's own preservative nature. This social lubricant greased the wheels of entire trade networks. It allowed for credit to be extended, for goods to be sent ahead with a promise of later payment, and for partnerships to form across vast ethnic and linguistic divides. The very phrase "salt of the earth," used to describe people of fundamental goodness, echoes this deep-seated understanding. It equates a person's character with the most essential, valuable, and preservative substance known to their world. This cultural value had a direct, if invisible, economic impact. By reinforcing social bonds and creating a shared language of good faith, salt dramatically lowered what economists would call transaction costs. It reduced the need for complex legal contracts or armed guards for every caravan. The trust it built was a form of social capital, a currency of relationships that made the physical currency of salt and gold flow more smoothly across continents. This dual role as both an economic engine and a sacred social glue reveals a profound truth about these ancient economies. They were not cold systems of exchange, but living networks built on human relationships, sanctified by the most essential mineral on Earth. Within the walls of the Great Library of Alexandria, the world's first known data center hummed with intellectual activity. This was not a quiet place for solitary study, but a vibrant hub where Babylonian clay tablets detailing the path of Venus sat alongside Greek scrolls on geometry and travelers' accounts of Saharan salt caravans. The library's mission was audacious: to collect all human knowledge under one roof and, more importantly, to synthesize it. The head librarian, Eratosthenes, performed the ultimate act of synthesis. He read an account stating that at noon on the summer solstice in the southern city of Syene, the sun shone directly down a deep well, illuminating the water at the bottom. This meant the sun was directly overhead. On the same day and time in Alexandria, he observed that a vertical pillar cast a distinct shadow. By measuring the angle of that shadow and knowing the distance between the two cities, he performed a calculation of celestial geometry that gave the Earth's circumference. His result was astonishingly close to the modern measurement. This was not abstract curiosity. This new understanding of the planet's true size was a revolutionary economic tool. For the Ptolemaic rulers who funded the library, it meant trade routes could be planned with unprecedented precision. The risks of sending a fleet into the unknown were dramatically reduced when you had a realistic sense of the distances involved. The library's collections on astronomy allowed for more reliable navigation. Its geographical texts mapped the locations of resources and trading partners, and its records of salt deposits and mining techniques informed state monopolies. This organized, centralized knowledge was a direct source of imperial power, fueling the commercial engine that made Alexandria the wealthiest port in the Mediterranean. It was the ultimate fusion of celestial insight and terrestrial need, all curated on 1,000,000 scrolls. But what happens when such a concentrated repository of the world's knowledge, the very bedrock of this global system, suddenly faces extinction? The magnetic compass was a quiet revolution in a wooden box. For thousands of years, a single overcast sky could halt the most experienced navigator, leaving their ship adrift on a starless sea. This new tool, a magnetized needle floating in water or balanced on a pin, changed everything. Its invention in Han Dynasty China was not initially for the open ocean, but for land-based sorcery and orientation. Yet its potential was quickly realized. By the time it reached medieval Europe, the compass had been refined into the mariner's most trusted companion. It offered a constant, unwavering truth, pointing toward the magnetic north regardless of fog, storm, or the sun's position. This was a profound liberation from the celestial calendar. A merchant could now plan a voyage in the dead of winter when the familiar constellations were obscured, confident that his ship could still hold its course. The compass democratized the high seas. The exclusive, guild-protected knowledge of the star priest was no longer the only key to crossing an ocean. Now, any competent captain with a compass could venture forth, breaking the monopoly on long-distance trade that had been held by a learned few. Economic power began to drift from those who could read the heavens to those who could afford this simple, terrestrial technology. This was the first step in a great uncoupling, a shift from a mystical, celestial economy to one guided by an invisible force within the earth itself. It was this reliable magnetic pull that would ultimately guide European caravels around the tip of Africa and across the Atlantic, opening up global trade routes on an unimaginable scale. The age of sailing by starlight was gently, irrevocably coming to a close. That Venetian ship laden with salt from Cyprus was not merely a merchant vessel. It was a weapon of economic warfare. The serene Republic of Venice understood that its naval supremacy, its very survival, depended on an uninterrupted supply of this white crystal. To control salt was to control the duration of a military campaign. A fleet with ample salted provisions could remain at sea for months, blockading enemy ports and projecting power across the Mediterranean. This stark reality ignited a series of brutal conflicts with their rivals in Genoa, a struggle less for territory and more for the evaporation ponds and coastal sultans that produced the lifeblood of their empires. These were the salt wars, where control over a mineral could dictate the fate of nations. Centuries later and an ocean away, this same strategic calculus unfolded with devastating effect during the American Civil War. Salt was the invisible front line. Union generals recognized that the Confederacy's ability to feed its armies relied entirely on salt to preserve pork, beef, and fish. Without it, troops would starve and morale would collapse, so Union cavalry was dispatched on a specific, destructive mission to find and demolish every Confederate saltworks they could locate. One of the most significant was at Saltville, Virginia, a place that saw fierce, repeated battles not for a city or a fort, but for the brine wells and furnaces that produced 1 million bushels of salt a year. The Union's systematic targeting of this infrastructure was a masterstroke of economic strangulation. It demonstrated a cold, modern truth that an economy built on an essential resource is also uniquely vulnerable. The elegant trade routes and celestial partnerships we have followed were always shadowed by this brutal potential for conflict. The wealth that built libraries and funded voyages could also, in an instant, become the reason for their destruction. A caravan master on the Silk Road would have found the finest Chinese silk to be less vital than the coarse salt in his provisions. While history remembers the luxurious fabrics, the true lifeblood of these transcontinental trails was often the heavy, unglamorous cargo of salt blocks, mined from the deserts and mountains of Central Asia. Every person and animal in the caravan required a daily intake of this mineral to endure the punishing journey across the Taklamakan Desert, a place whose name translates to "once you go in, you will not come out." This was not a path for the faint of heart, but a grueling enterprise where survival was traded, ounce for ounce, in salt. Yet, the caravan's safe passage depended on a different kind of currency, one that cost nothing to carry but was priceless in its application. The merchants and their guides were adept celestial navigators, using the unwavering North Star and the familiar sweep of the Big Dipper to maintain their bearing through endless, featureless dunes. By night they walked by starlight, by day they traded in salt. This was the salt and stars economy made manifest, a river of commerce flowing over land. And flowing with it was something even more transformative than silk or salt. It was the shared knowledge of the heavens themselves. Detailed Chinese star charts, which recorded the sudden appearance of guest stars we now call supernova, traveled westward along these routes. In return, Greek concepts of celestial spheres and Indian methods for calculating planetary movements filtered eastward into the imperial courts of China. A single merchant might never grasp the full scientific weight of the scrolls in his care, but he was the vital courier for this intellectual exchange. The Silk Road was therefore far more than a simple trade route. It was the planet's first information superhighway, where the most valuable commodities were not always the ones you could hold in your hand, but the ideas that could map the sky and, in doing so, more closely connect a vast and wondering world. The shimmering trade routes and legendary cities built on salt carried a hidden weight. For every slab of precious white gold that reached a market, there was a story of immense human effort, often born from hardship. The deep, labyrinthine mines of Hallstatt, while a source of Celtic wealth, were places of perpetual darkness and grueling labor. Miners, sometimes drawn from the lowest ranks of society or those with few other choices, would spend their lives underground, chipping at the rock face in cramped, airless tunnels. The work was not only exhausting but carried constant risk from tunnel collapses and rockfalls. In the searing heat of the Sahara, the labor was different but just as punishing. Workers at places like Tagheza endured relentless sun and extreme dehydration while harvesting salt from the pans, their lives shortened by the harsh conditions and the fine, corrosive dust that damaged their lungs over time. This was the foundation upon which the glittering economies of salt were built, a sobering reminder that the grand narratives of empire and trade often rest upon the quiet, overlooked sacrifices of countless individuals. Acknowledging this dimension does not diminish the ingenuity of these ancient systems, but rather completes our understanding, asking us to consider the full human cost of the wealth that shaped our world. The stones of Stonehenge were not placed by chance. Each massive sarsen was positioned with a celestial logic, framing the rising sun on the summer solstice in a spectacle of light and shadow. This architectural precision, repeated in the Great Pyramid's alignment with the pole star, was the ultimate expression of a state's power. A ruler who could command the very landscape to mirror the heavens was demonstrating an authority that seemed almost divine. The economic implication was staggering. Consider the resources required to build the pyramids, a project that mobilized tens of thousands of workers for generations. This was not a vanity project. It was a massive, state-sponsored investment in social and economic control. Feeding, housing, and organizing such a colossal workforce required a sophisticated bureaucracy capable of collecting and redistributing grain, textiles, and tools on an unimaginable scale. The monument itself became the engine of a planned economy, centralizing power and creating a shared national identity through collective labor, and the ideological payoff was just as critical. By aligning these structures with the solstices or specific star clusters, the ruling class cemented their role as the essential intermediaries between the people and the cosmos. They controlled the calendar, which told farmers exactly when to plant and when to harvest. This guaranteed the agricultural surplus that fed everyone from the laborer to the pharaoh. The stone circle and the pyramid were therefore more than tombs or temples. They were the central banks of their age, physical declarations that the kingdom's prosperity was eternally linked to the orderly cycles of the sky. This celestial architecture provided a foundation of stability, but it also created a system of immense concentration, where both economic and spiritual power rested in the hands of a few. How does such a centralized system fare when a new, decentralized form of celestial guidance begins to spread across the world? Venetian merchants understood that true power lay not in owning luxuries, but in controlling necessities. While their galleys carried silks and spices, the Republic's immense wealth was anchored by something far more fundamental: a complete and calculated stranglehold on the salt trade. Their strategy was one of brilliant economic coercion. The Venetian Senate decreed that every merchant vessel sailing the Adriatic Sea, regardless of its final destination, was required to carry a cargo of salt. The state would then exercise its right to purchase this salt at a price it alone set, a price deliberately kept artificially low. This forcibly acquired salt was then stockpiled or shipped to markets where it could be sold for a substantial profit. It was a masterstroke of market manipulation, creating a river of revenue that flowed directly into the state's treasury. Beyond this, Venice exerted direct control over the means of production. They managed the salt pans within their own lagoon with military precision, and their expanding empire soon encompassed the vital salt-producing islands of Cyprus and Crete. This guaranteed a massive, steady supply entirely under their command. The wealth generated was the financial engine of a maritime superpower. It paid for the construction of the formidable Venetian navy, the very galleys that protected their trade routes and enforced their salt laws. It funded the intricate canals and breathtaking palaces that made the city itself a wonder of the world. It bankrolled the diplomats and spies who wove a web of influence across the Mediterranean. Venice demonstrated that an empire could be built not on vast territories, but on the calculated control of a single crystalline resource. This model of centralized power over an essential good raises a profound question. How does such a system, so effective for centuries, eventually begin to show its limits when confronted with a changing world? The Polynesian star compass was a map not drawn on parchment, but etched into the living memory of a navigator. Unlike the European compass that pointed to a single magnetic north, this system was a celestial dome encompassing the entire horizon. It was divided into 32 directional houses, each one defined by the precise point where a specific star would rise from the ocean or sink back beneath its waves. For a master navigator, the night sky was not a static picture but a rotating clock face. He would know that the brilliant star known as Hoculaire, our Arcturus, rose in the house called Hanaakamalama. If his canoe was positioned correctly, the star known as Kaulana, our Canopus, would set directly in the house called Monu. His vessel was the central point in this grand celestial sphere. He did not sail toward a star, he held his position within this moving grid. If the stars began to rise in the wrong houses, it meant the canoe had drifted off course, and he would correct its path before the error became fatal. This intellectual technology was the product of a lifetime of rigorous training, a secret science passed orally from a master to his chosen apprentice. The knowledge was so vital, so powerful, that it was considered sacred, the highest form of intellectual capital in a society with no written language. This was the sophisticated engine that powered the entire Polynesian economy. It enabled not random drift, but intentional, repeatable voyages of colonization and trade across thousands of miles of open ocean. A navigator could set a star path from Tahiti to Hawaii with the same confidence a Roman merchant would take the Via Appia. This created a vast, decentralized maritime network where basalt from one island was traded for finely woven bark cloth from another, and volcanic glass for tools was exchanged for sacred red feathers used in ceremonial regalia. They built an economic web across the world's largest ocean, a testament to a system where wealth flowed along pathways defined not by lines on a map, but by the unwavering rhythms of the stars. Within the quiet of the alchemist's workshop, the mundane substance of salt was transformed into a cosmic principle. It was not merely a mineral for curing meat, but one of the three holy substances of the great work, representing the body, stability, and the very matter of the physical world. Its partner, Mercury, symbolized the spirit and the mind, while sulfur represented the soul and transformative fire. The alchemist believed that by perfectly purifying and recombining these three, they could achieve the ultimate prize, the philosopher's stone. This legendary substance promised a dual transcendence, the power to transmute lead into gold, achieving limitless earthly wealth, and the ability to grant spiritual immortality, conquering the constraints of the flesh. The entire process was a meticulous dance between the earthly and the celestial. The metals they worked with in their flasks and furnaces were not seen as inert matter. Each one, from lead to gold, was believed to be a child of the heavens, its properties and potential directly influenced by the specific energies of a planet. The red tint of iron was governed by Mars, the shimmer of silver by the moon, and the incorruptible brilliance of gold by the sun. An alchemist would time their experiments to the movements of these celestial bodies, believing a distillation begun under a certain planetary alignment would capture that star's essence, guiding the metal's transformation within the vessel. In this esoteric tradition, we see the ultimate symbolic fusion of our two themes. The quest for the philosopher's stone was a grand, mystical metaphor for the human desire to master both the salt of the earth and the influence of the stars, to unify the tangible and the cosmic into a single source of ultimate power. It was an economy of the soul where the currency was purified matter and the dividends were both eternal life and infinite riches. This ambition to harness the universe's fundamental forces, though cloaked in symbolism, reveals a timeless truth about our drive to control the very building blocks of existence. Our everyday speech is a living museum of these ancient economies. The word salary is a direct deposit from the world of Roman soldiers, but it is far from the only one. Think of a simple salad. Its name comes from the Latin herba salata, literally meaning salted greens, a direct echo of that daily, practical need to season and preserve food. The language of the stars is even more deeply embedded in how we express thought and fate. When you consider an idea, you are engaging in a mental process named for the stars. The Latin root considerare means to observe the stars carefully, to contemplate them with intense focus. This act of celestial observation became the metaphor for all serious thought. And if a situation becomes a disaster, you are literally blaming the heavens. The word springs from the Latin astrum, for star, with the prefix dis meaning bad. A disaster was an event caused by an evil or misaligned star, a celestial omen made real on Earth. These are not mere curiosities. They are linguistic fossils, proof of how deeply the twin pillars of salt and stars supported the very architecture of human consciousness. Our ancestors did not just use these resources, they thought with them, building their understanding of fortune, misfortune, and reason upon a foundation of white crystals and distant suns. A modern container ship, guided by GPS, follows a digital star path as precise as any known to the Phoenicians. This network of satellites is our man-made constellation, a celestial map rebuilt in silicon and radio waves. Its signals orchestrate the global flow of goods, telling a ship's captain his exact position in the vast Pacific with an accuracy the ancient Polynesians would have marveled at. The principle remains unchanged, using a fixed point of reference beyond the Earth to find your way. The stars themselves have been supplemented, not replaced, by this new layer of heavens. Meanwhile, deep within guarded storage facilities, nations amass reserves of a different kind of essential material. These are not slabs of salt, but stockpiles of lithium for batteries, cobalt for electronics, and rare earth elements for everything from smartphones to jet fighters. These strategic mineral reserves are the direct heir to the salt monopolies of China and Venice. They represent the same cold calculation that control over a non-negotiable resource is a primary source of security and power. A government today does not tax its citizens to buy salt, but it will intervene heavily in markets to secure the minerals that power its economy and military. The fundamental drivers are timeless. We still navigate by points beyond ourselves, and we still build our security on control of the Earth's vital substances. The technologies have evolved from star charts to satellites, from salt pans to lithium brine pools, but the human imperatives of guidance and resource control continue to shape the architecture of our world, silently echoing the ancient partnership of salt and stars. What other invisible threads from our deep past do you think are woven into the fabric of our modern lives? This ancient partnership between the earth and the heavens was a complete operating system for civilization. Salt provided the tangible currency of life itself, a physical substance that preserved food, cemented social bonds, and filled the treasuries of empires. The stars offered the indispensable map, an intellectual compass that guided caravans across trackless deserts and ships across uncharted oceans. One was the grounded foundation of wealth, the other its celestial guide. Together, they transformed isolated communities into interconnected networks, fueling the rise of cultures from the Mediterranean to the Pacific. Their legacy is not confined to history books. It lives on in the words we use to describe our wages and our misfortunes, in the satellite networks that guide our global trade, and in the strategic reserves of minerals that power our modern world. The next time you glance at the starry sky or taste a seasoned meal, you are touching the same fundamental forces that once orchestrated the wealth of nations. If this journey into the deep currents of our past has revealed new connections for you, I invite you to share your reflections below. Your curiosity fuels these explorations, so subscribe to continue uncovering the hidden histories that quietly shape our lives today.